So formula shortage, it's something that's been stressing parents out for a while now. Understandably, there's nothing scarier than not knowing if you have your baby's food supply or your special needs toddler's food supply for tomorrow and the next week and the next week. How can moms and dads find a formula that is safe for a baby and that has all the nutrients needed during the shortage when supplies have been really short?
Yeah, so first let me just say how much I empathize with parents out there who may be in a circumstance where they can't get the formula they're used to. My son was actually on infant formula just a few years ago, and I remember how much thought and care we put into finding the right formula for him, and how vital that was for his growth. So I certainly empathize with that, and I just want you to know that many of us who are working on this in the administration, we come at this not only as public servants, but as parents and as grandparents. And we know just this is very personal for us. We know how important this is. So even though, when that plant closed down in Michigan and cut out a huge chunk, of the food supply for our kids, even though, we would have loved for that not to have happened, for the family have actually met the right standards and been able to keep running, we want to do everything we can to make sure that that gap is closed. So here's the good news. There are a number of the strategies we have been working on have been actually making progress. So we've got a significant increase in production here in the United States of formula. We've got millions and millions of bottle equivalents of formula coming from abroad now that we've been able to ship, and FDA has made sure that these are safe. And now this plant is finally back up and running, and it's starting to ramp up in terms of its production. So this is all good news. But here's what parents need to know right now. If you go to this store and if you find that you cannot locate the formula that you're used to, it is okay to substitute another formula. I know sometimes that can feel scary to do when you're used to one formula, but the good news is anything you find on the shelf is something that has met the FDA standards for safety, and it's okay for your child. A general word of advice is to try to stay within the same category though of formula. So if you had a cow's milk based formula, to try to use another cow's milk based formula. If you were using a soy formula, to use a soy based formula. A hypoallergenic formula, to use another hypoallergenic product. So if you stay within those categories, generally your child should do okay. And if your baby's having a hard time adjusting or doesn't like the taste of the new formula, you can try to slowly introduce small amounts of the new formula with it.
Say that.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can slowly increase the amount of the new formula in the mixture over time.
Which is, by the way, how you can also introduce cow's milk when the time comes, just a little and a little and a little and a little more. And speaking of cow's milk, there have been some recommendations from AAP that if your baby's close to 1 year, which is when you can introduce cow's milk, that it might be safe to do in the short term as a last resort. So if it is a last resort you have taken advantage of, and you've been adding some cow's milk to formula just because you haven't been able to get enough, and your baby is very close to a year, once the shortage is over, or once you can find formula, should you go back to formula and wait till the first birthday, blow out the first birthday cake or the smash cake, and then introduce cow's milk again?
I remember that smash cake.
Yeah, isn't it fun? Messy.
So I would, if you have ended up using cow's milk for an infant who's 6 months old, between 6 months and a year, I would go back to formula as soon as you're able to. What the American Academy of Pediatrics had suggested when they raised the possibility of using whole cow's milk for babies 6 months and older, that was a last resort, only if formula is not available. And the good news is, though, we are now in a circumstance because of the increased production domestically and the supply coming from abroad, where it is much more available. The formula, and especially formulas that may not be of the same brand that you're used to, but are in the same category. And so we want parents to reach for another brand before they reach for cow's milk. And keep in mind, if you do have to reach for that as a last resort, I would switch back to formula as soon as you're able to.
And I always feel if you have any questions at all about which formula is best for your baby, or whether your baby is going to have sensitivities to a new formula, which you should not assume, but might happen, always check with your pediatrician because they're the best source of advice when it comes to baby feeding.
That's exactly right. Your pediatrician is an invaluable resource as always. And when it comes to whole cow's milk, again, this is a last resort, and it's not for kids who need specialty formulas or with allergies or other health needs. And if your child is in that situation where they have specialty formula needs, I would talk to your pediatrician instead of switching them to cow's milk as a last resort.
And of course, never make your own formula from scratch. Homemade formula is not safe.
Yes, we don't want to. Babies, have very specific needs, and formula is made in the right composition. That's just right for our infants, and we don't want to try reproducing that in our kitchen, even with the best of intents. That sometimes can do more harm than good.
Absolutely, it best replicates breast milk, which is what you're after, is something as close as possible to breast milk. When will the shortage be over? Not putting you on the spot or anything. When do you anticipate?
No, it's the right question, and obviously we want it to be over as soon as possible. While we can't give an exact date, I do want to reassure people that the administration is using every tool at its disposal to increase that supply, and we're actually seeing progress in that regard. The president had talked weeks ago about using the Defense Production Act to help increase the supply here and make sure companies had every tool and ingredient they needed to get more supply out the door and onto shelves. That is now being done. He'd also talked about launching Operation Fly Formula to bring safe formula as quickly as possible from outside the United States to our shelves here at home. And now that is happening. More than a dozen shipments, have come in and are on the way, and we've got millions of formula bottle equivalents that have come in from abroad. So all of this is helping, and we've seen production increase significantly. So my hope is that we will get there, as quickly as we can. But I do want parents to know that we're doing everything possible, and this again is personal for us. So the reason people are working 24/7 around the clock on this is because there's nothing more important than making sure that our children have the nutrients and sustenance that they need.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that reassuring message. And if parents have more questions about formula, is there a website they can turn to?
Yes. So if you have more questions, you can go to hhs.gov/formula. This is a place where you can find information in English and in Spanish about formula options, about where you can find formula, and it's a great resource.
Thank you again so much.
Of course. Thanks for doing this, Heidi. It's always good to be with you.
Big hugs.
Hugs to you as well.